guys, so I'm here today to do a book review of New World Fairy Tales by Cassandra Parkin. Just to put it out there before I go any further, this book was a 5 out of 5 star read for me, and this review is basically just going to be what this book is about without spoilers and why I loved it so much. So let's dive straight into it, shall we? This book is published by Salt Publishing, who are quickly becoming one of my favourite publishers, and was first published in 2011. I have never read any Cassandra Parkin before, so this is my first of her work, but I do believe she has 2 novels as well as this collection of short stories, all of which are based on original fairy tales. Each short story is delivered as if it were an interview. They are titled Interview 9, Interview 4, Interview 17. So I guess the idea is that whoever the unnamed interviewer is has obviously been interviewing more than just the stories that Cassandra Parkin has told in this story. And each story is basically a transcript of what the interviewee says to the interviewer. So we never hear the interviewer's voice or the questions they ask, we just hear exactly what the interviewee replies to them, and then when they tell their story to the interviewer. The interviewer appears to be looking for the inspiration or the original characters from the fairy tales covered in this book. There's 6 stories in here. 4 of them I found very obvious what fairy tale they were. There was Snow White, Cinderella, the 3 pigs and like the big bad wolf, and there was Jack and the Beanstalk. Those were the very like obvious, you could tell these were adapted from those fairy tales. The other 2 either were slightly more elusive retellings that I didn't recognise the exact fairy tale they were retelling in, or they were an amalgamation of multiple fairy tales, because I felt when I was reading them I could see multiple fairy tales in them. In particular, one of them I felt like there were elements of Beauty and the Beast, there were elements of Rumpelstiltskin. That could be that obviously fairy tale themes can be very similar and some of the plots aren't that different, so that could just be me reading more into it than there is, and it was just a retelling of one of these fairy tales, or it could be both, and I wouldn't put it past Cassandra Parkin to have sort of embodied multiple fairy tales within larger retellings of one story. But whatever Cassandra Parkin was up to, she did it splendidly. This book was perfection, perhaps. At least I enjoyed every page of it. Now each of these stories is set in the real world. They're all set in the USA in various different states and places. There's one set in Louisiana, one set in New Orleans, etc, etc. But despite this, in some of them there were certainly aspects of magic realism. Now obviously these are fairy tale retellings, so there's a bit of a magical feel to them. Her writing just created an almost magical world. However, most of them are quite real, and they are fairy tales in a realistic setting with realistic characters and realistic jobs and just things that could really happen. Apart from some areas where there are little elements of magic realism, particularly the retelling of the 3 Little Pigs and the Big Bad Wolf, there's explicit magic realism in that one, but in most of the others the elements of magic realism are more like under the surface or not there at all, so there's a bit of a mixture there. I think because of this though, it'll appeal to a lot of different people. People that enjoy the more extreme fantasy to magic realism genres, then those that enjoy a much more realistic, ordinary life, real people story. This book embodies both in a way. Because it's fairy tale retelling set in the real world, I think a lot of you will enjoy this. There's a real mixture in this as well of themes of tragedy and themes of hope. Some of the stories have very gruesome, tragic, unfortunate, unhappy endings and events take place. Others are much more inspirational and hopeful and more traditionally happy. So there's a bit of everything in here really. But whatever theme she's trying to get across in each story, she does it wonderfully. She is such a beautiful writer. I really hope she does publish more of her short story collections, because I really enjoyed this. In fact, I would be incredibly happy if she were just to bring out another book in the series with like more of the interviews with different fairy tale characters. I would be incredibly happy, but that might not be something she wants to do. And these are certainly Cassandra Parkin's own feats of imagination. They are certainly not regurgitations of traditional fairy tales, just with different characters' names and a different setting. They are incredibly imaginative, and she's done something very special with each story. And I think whatever we traditionally associate fairy tales as offering to children, in the way that quite often people see fairy tales as ways to teach children moral lessons or about the world, or just as kind of almost teaching tools, I feel like fairy tales are. These do this for adults in the modern world. I think her characterisation was really interesting, spot on, worked so well for all of the characters. Each individual voice was very interesting to listen to. One of the other techniques she used was, although some of the interviewees were the same character that featured as the main character in the story they told, so they were telling their own story, some of the interviewees were telling other characters' stories. So they obviously there's this idea that all of the fairy tale characters, or at least some of them, exist in a similar world and know each other. So that was really interesting. I really enjoyed the different voices. Can't really say anything bad about this book. 5 out of 5 stars, like I said. One of my favourite books of this year, and it is only January. I would highly recommend all of you pick this up. If you have read it, I'd love to know what you thought of it. I would also love to hear any recommendations of more short story collections which retell fairy tales, if you've got any, in the comments down below. But I think that's all I have to say. I've gushed for long enough. I think you should all just go read this and experience it for yourself now, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!